The ground trembles as thousands of hooves thunder across the Italian countryside. Banners snap in the wind, swords glint in the sunlight, and at the front of this massive army rides a man in gleaming armor. But this isn't just any military commander. The figure leading this force of destruction is wearing a papal tiara beneath his battle helmet. That's right, the spiritual leader of the Catholic Church, Christ's representative on earth, is personally leading men to slaughter and be slaughtered. Talk about extreme career diversification. When you think of popes, you probably imagine elderly men in white robes blessing crowds from balconies, not battle-hardened warriors covered in blood and surrounded by the screams of the dying. But throughout history, many popes weren't content with merely wielding spiritual power. They wanted military might too. These weren't just administrators giving orders from afar. Some popes personally strapped on armor, grabbed weapons, and led armies into battle with all the ferocity of medieval warlords. The same hands that blessed the faithful also commanded troops to kill their enemies. So much for turn the other cheek, huh? Today we're marching into the blood-soaked history of warrior popes. The men who traded prayers for swords and transformed the chair of St. Peter into a battle throne. From defending Rome against barbarian invaders to launching massive campaigns to reclaim the Holy Land, these papal commanders wrote their legacies not just in Holy Scripture but in the blood of their enemies. In an age when political power came from military strength, these popes decided that God's work sometimes required a sharp blade rather than a gentle word. After all, why wait for divine judgment when you could deliver it yourself with a well-aimed crossbow bolt? But before we start our papal war chronicle, let's address the obvious question. Isn't the Pope supposed to be, peaceful? Didn't Jesus specifically tell Peter to put away his sword? Well, yes, but medieval and Renaissance popes had a convenient workaround. You see, popes weren't just spiritual leaders. They were also temporal rulers of the Papal States, a significant chunk of central Italy. And being a secular ruler in medieval Europe meant one thing: maintaining an army and sometimes using it. It's that classic work-life balance problem, except instead of balancing spreadsheets and family time, these guys were balancing mass and massacres. Our first warrior pope sets the stage for this bloody papal tradition. Pope Leo IV, who reigned from 847 to 855, faced a terrifying threat. Saracen pirates from North Africa were raiding the Italian coast, threatening Rome itself. Rather than fleeing or negotiating, Leo personally took command of a fleet of ships. During the naval battle of Ostia in 849, Leo's forces crushed the Saracen raiders. According to accounts of the battle, the Pope didn't just organize the defense. He stood on the shore blessing the Christian ships as they sailed into combat, and potentially directing tactical movements. The victory was so significant that Raphael later painted the battle in the Vatican, showing Leo as a decisive military leader. Apparently, the keys to heaven worked just as well for unlocking someone's skull on the battlefield. But Leo IV was practically a pacifist compared to our next holy warrior, Pope Julius II, who ruled from 1503 to 1513, earned the nickname the Warrior Pope and the Fearsome Pope, titles you won't find in any official Catholic liturgy. Julius didn't just command armies from a safe distance. This 60-something pope personally led troops into battle, inspected fortifications, and directed artillery fire while wearing full battle armor. Imagine your grandpa not just playing Call of Duty, but actually leading SEAL Team 6 missions, and you'll get the idea of how unusual this was, even for the rough-and-tumble Renaissance. Julius II's most famous military campaign was the War of the League of Cambrai, where he fought to expel what he called barbarians, primarily the French, from Italian soil. In the dead of winter 1511, Julius personally directed the siege of the fortress city of Mirandola. Picture this: a 67-year-old man, supposedly God's representative on earth, standing in the snow and freezing mud, shouting orders as cannons bombarded the city walls. When his troops finally breached the defenses, Julius didn't wait for the city gates to be cleared. He had himself hoisted in a wooden basket and lifted over the walls so he could be the first to enter the conquered city. Talk about an extreme papal entrance. The only thing missing was pyrotechnics and an entrance theme song. Even Julius's appearance screamed warrior rather than holy man. He grew a full beard, breaking with papal tradition, to show his commitment to not leaving the battlefield until victory was achieved. Contemporaries described him as having the temperament of a warrior, and the Venetian ambassador wrote that Julius had the soul of an emperor. If his body matched his soul, the whole world would not be enough for his ambitions. Michelangelo's famous statue of Moses is said to be inspired by Julius's fierce demeanor, and if you've seen that statue's intense glare, you know that's not a compliment to the Pope's bedside manner. But Julius II wasn't just swinging swords for fun. His military campaigns had a purpose, creating a unified papal territory that would be strong enough to resist foreign domination. Before his pontificate, the Papal States were a fragmented collection of cities and regions, many controlled by local lords or foreign powers. Julius changed that through sheer force of will and a whole lot of bloodshed. His military victories created a consolidated papal state that would survive for centuries, until Italian unification in the 1800s. So in a weird way, his warmongering actually succeeded in creating long-term stability, a fact that probably didn't comfort the thousands who died in his campaigns. It's like burning down a village to save it, except on a Renaissance Italy-sized scale. Let's rewind the clock a few centuries to another legendary warrior pope, Pope Urban II. While he didn't personally lead troops in battle like Julius, Urban unleashed one of the most consequential military campaigns in history, the First Crusade. In 1095, Urban gave a sermon at the Council of Clermont that ignited religious fervor across Europe, calling for armed Christian knights to journey to the Holy Land and wrest Jerusalem from Muslim control. His words, "God wills it," became the rallying cry for thousands of European warriors who embarked on this bloody religious mission. Urban's fiery rhetoric was a masterclass in medieval propaganda. He described alleged atrocities committed against Christian pilgrims, promised spiritual rewards, including the remission of sins for those who took up the cross, and framed the campaign as a righteous war commanded by God himself. This wasn't just permission to kill, it was a papal mandate for violence that promised heavenly rewards. The resulting First Crusade succeeded in capturing Jerusalem in 1099, but with such brutality that chroniclers described the blood of slaughtered Muslims and Jews reaching up to the knees of the Crusaders' horses. Urban never saw this victory. He died 2 weeks before Jerusalem fell, but his words had unleashed a tsunami of religious violence that would shape world history for centuries. Not all warrior popes were successful in their military ventures. Take Pope John XII, who reigned from 955 to 964 and might win the award for worst combination of military leader and religious figure. Contemporary accounts describe him as turning the Lateran Palace into something between a brothel and a bandit's den. When he wasn't busy with his, let's say, extracurricular activities, John led troops against the local Italian nobility. His military adventures went so poorly that he had to call in Otto I of Germany for help, promising to make Otto emperor in exchange for military support. But once Otto arrived with his army, John got nervous about the Germans' power and secretly allied with Otto's enemies. When Otto discovered this betrayal, he deposed John and installed a new pope. John later returned to power briefly after Otto left Rome, only to reportedly die while in bed with a married woman. Talk about going out with a bang rather than a whimper. One of the most tragic warrior popes was Pius II, who served from 1458 to 1464. Unlike some of his power-hungry predecessors, Pius had a genuine reason for his military ambitions. The Ottoman Empire had just conquered Constantinople, the heart of Eastern Christianity, and was threatening to push further into Europe. Pius spent his entire pontificate trying to organize a crusade to push back the Ottoman advance. He wrote passionate letters to European monarchs, devoted papal resources to the cause, and even planned to personally lead the expedition despite his failing health. In a dramatic scene that could be straight out of a Hollywood epic, the elderly and ill Pius traveled to Ancona, on the Adriatic coast in 1464, where Crusader forces were supposed to assemble. But as he waited in the port city, watching the horizon for ships that never came in sufficient numbers, the Pope grew sicker and died, his great crusade dying with him. Then there's the fascinating case of Pope Alexander VI, perhaps better known to history buffs and fans of historically questionable TV shows as Rodrigo Borgia. While Alexander didn't personally lead troops into battle, he was a master of military politics and proxy warfare. He used his son, Cesare Borgia, as his military commander, providing him with papal funds and authority to carve out a personal kingdom in central Italy. The Borgia Pope's military strategy included everything from strategic marriages to outright assassination of rival noble families. Cesare's brutal efficiency inspired Machiavelli's The Prince, and Alexander's papacy represents perhaps the apex of the Renaissance papacy's militarization, where spiritual concerns took a firm backseat to territorial ambitions and family power. It was less spreading God's word and more spreading the Borgia family influence at sword point. We can't talk about warrior popes without mentioning Pope Sixtus IV, who reigned from 1471 to 1484 and had a particular talent for proxy wars and political assassination attempts. Sixtus was deeply involved in the infamous Pazzi conspiracy, a plot to murder Lorenzo and Giuliano de' Medici, the rulers of Florence, during Mass in Florence Cathedral. On April 26, 1478, assassins struck during the elevation of the host, killing Giuliano but only wounding Lorenzo. The Pope had given his blessing to this plot, literally sanctioning murder in a church during the holiest part of the Mass. When the assassination partially failed and the people of Florence rallied behind the surviving Lorenzo, Sixtus excommunicated the entire city and allied with the Kingdom of Naples to wage war against them. Nothing says Vicar of Christ quite like excommunicating thousands of people for failing to be murdered properly, right? Some popes found themselves thrust into military leadership by circumstances beyond their control. Pope Leo I, who reigned from 440 to 461, faced a terrifying threat when Attila the Hun marched on Rome in 452. With no effective Roman military to defend the city, Leo personally led a delegation to meet the feared scourge of God. According to legend, when Leo spoke with Attila, the Hun leader saw a vision of Saints Peter and Paul standing behind the Pope with drawn swords, threatening divine retribution if he attacked Rome. Whether due to supernatural intervention or more practical concerns like supply shortages and disease in his army, Attila withdrew. This diplomatic victory helped establish the papacy as a political force in Western Europe and showed that sometimes a pope's most effective weapon wasn't an army, but religious authority and nerves of steel. One of history's more unusual papal military campaigns involves Pope Julius III, who ruled from 1550 to 1555 and launched what historians have mockingly called the War of Parma, essentially a military campaign over a personal grudge. The conflict began when Julius demanded the return of the city of Parma from Ottavio Farnese, who refused and allied with France for protection. The ensuing war drained the papal treasury, achieved none of Julius's objectives, and was finally ended by a peace treaty that left everything basically where it started. It was the papal equivalent of spending your life savings on a court case over a parking spot. Technically, you had the right to do it, but everyone thinks you're an idiot for actually going through with it. The only real casualties were the unfortunate soldiers and civilians caught in the crossfire of papal ego. Perhaps the most militarily successful pope was Innocent III, who reigned from 1198 to 1216, and never personally took up arms, but wielded armies like precision instruments. Under his direction, papal forces transformed the political landscape of Europe. He launched the Albigensian Crusade against the Cathar heretics in southern France, which was less a religious conversion and more a brutal campaign of extermination. When asked how soldiers should distinguish between heretics and faithful Catholics in the city of Béziers, The papal legate famously replied, "Kill them all, God will recognize his own." The resulting massacre killed an estimated 20,000 men, women and children, both Cathars and Catholics. Innocent also organized the disastrous Fourth Crusade, which was supposed to recapture Jerusalem, but instead sacked Constantinople, the greatest Christian city of the time. Talk about missing your target by a few thousand miles. The tradition of warrior popes gradually faded as the political landscape of Europe changed. The Protestant Reformation, the rise of nation-states, and changing attitudes toward the proper role of religious leaders all contributed to the demilitarization of the papacy. The last pope to personally command troops was probably Julius II in the early 16th century, and the papal states themselves were finally dissolved in 1870 when Italy was unified. Today's popes focus on spiritual leadership and moral authority rather than territorial control, which is probably for the best. Can you imagine Pope Leon XIV directing drone strikes or inspecting the Swiss Guard's latest tank acquisitions? The modern papacy's weapons are words, not swords, though as history shows, sometimes words can be just as dangerous. The warrior popes might have expanded papal territories and influence in the short term, but their military adventures also contributed to the eventual backlash against church power and the fragmentation of Western Christianity. In trying to build God's kingdom through violence, they may have undermined the very institution they were fighting to strengthen. Were these warrior popes necessary defenders of Christianity in violent times, or did they betray their spiritual calling by taking up the sword? Let me know your thoughts, and if you like to explore history's strangest contradictions and most fascinating figures, don't forget to like and subscribe.